Look at the adjective. Play.
And I have half the brain that you do. I told you. Oh, God.
Now is the franchise going to take the Viagra?
Gonna put some butts in the seat.
Hello there, wrestling fans, and welcome to episode number 89 of Because WCW, the podcast where the big boys play. My name is the Twisted Genius, Dean Ayers, and I'm joined as ever by sports journalist for DAZN, Hooked on Wrestling, and wherever else. Charlton Athletic, he does stuff, boy, he's everywhere. He's like a rat. You're never more than 4 feet away from him. Liam Happ, good evening to you.
Yeah, well, as the old saying famously goes, Dean, I am a jack of all trades and a master of all of them, because I'm great.
I see, that's how great he really is, folks. And how are you doing today?
How am I doing, Dean? I'm doing great, and do you know why?
Tell me why.
Today was my day. I was, to quote a famous WCW character, today I was the chosen one, because today I finally landed a PlayStation 5.
Oh.
The much elusive PlayStation 5, the long queues when supply drops are slowly getting shorter, or at the very least they're getting to the point where more people are likely to be lucky, you know, people getting theirs, and finally I was able to get it. I'm very happy because it means I'll have it in place just in time for MLB 21, which is one of my favourite games to play, and I won't hear that bloody noise anymore. And for those of you who don't own a PlayStation 4, basically what it is after a little while, like a year or so, the PlayStation 4s would famously start to overheat on the regular, so the fans would make a really loud whirring noise that people would equate with a plane taking off. Having that sound play every time you're trying to enjoy your game is not ideal. So I will not miss that sodding noise.
I thought you were referring to your daughter. I thought you meant you put some headphones in. You can't hear her asking you to, Daddy, get me this, Daddy, get me that.
I am stuck with that noise for life, unfortunately.
Okay, fair enough.
But I do also want to get a Nintendo Switch very soon. I still don't have one, and I think she'd love that. She's getting to the right age now to play a bit of Nintendo Switch with her dear old dad.
I see. You see, I contemplated the PlayStation 5, but I just don't really have time or inclination to play games these days. I have to say, I think I have reached the point, sadly, where I am getting too old for this shit.
I thought it was because you absolutely sucked at FIFA and didn't want the
There is that
humiliation.
as well. There is that as well. Obviously, the only reason that I suck at FIFA is because it's all rigged.
It is all rigged.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't think the two are linked, but it is all rigged.
It's all rigged. Yeah, good. Glad we're agreed on that. Now, today we have a very special episode, which comes to you. The content of which comes to you from our Twitter page, which if you don't follow us already, you can go to Twitter at Because WCW.
Yeah, what's wrong with you if you don't follow us already? Get to it.
I mean, if you do follow us, well, if you're listening to this, you probably follow us, but yeah, you may not do. But we have. It's fair to say that we've had a decent amount of traffic on our Twitter page recently. Probably partly thanks to Mark Merrow interacting with us.
Legend.
Legend.
My favourite WCW performer of all time now.
So we liked him beforehand. You know, that feud with DDP was classic. Today marks, if you're listening to this on the day we've released this, which is Friday, March the 26th, 2021, today marks a very sad anniversary. It is 20 years today that the last ever episode of Monday Nitro, and for all intents and purposes, the last bit of WCW television. I mean, there was I think, was it a Saturday night?
A worldwide, yeah. They did a worldwide that was kind of because it's all regurgitated footage, and I think it had Schiavone and Hudson recording the in-betweens, the segues, relatively new. But yeah, when you're talking actual proper content, everyone knows it ended with Sting and Ric Flair sharing a hug in that ring.
Yeah. And the simulcast with
No,
with
it didn't happen.
no, it didn't happen.
Ended with Sting and Ric Flair. WCW ended with Sting and Ric
yes,
Flair.
yeah. So that was on this day 20 years ago, which is an incredible thing. It was that long ago. So it got us thinking. Because the original plan, and I'm pretty sure this is mentioned in Guy Evans' book, Guy Evans, who we spoke to previously, that the original plan was that WCW would continue as a WWE or WWF as it was an owned company until there was that infamous match on Raw between Booker T and Buff Bagwell.
Yes, there was always, it always felt like a duty of obligation, like they've just bought the competition, which beyond the initial hard-on that Vince McMahon got from being able to do that and winning the wars, he's then left with this. I wouldn't go as far as to say buyer's remorse, but he's left with this afterthought of, right, I've had the rush of sticking it to them because they had the audacity to do what I did to so many other promoters in the 80s. Now what? And they've got this roster of talent. You know, I think they optioned what 25 contracts. So they've taken
Yeah,
on a lot of mostly the prospects, the guys with an upside. Obviously, they've left the big money contracts of the big name stars alone for the time being, but they've got all the rights, the library, and they're thinking, well, it makes sense for us to try and do something with this if it will turn us money. And obviously, there was just all that uncertainty because if you remember, just 6 days after that fateful night, you had WrestleMania 17, one of the greatest pay-per-views of all time. They had Shane McMahon wrapping up his completely WWE-based storyline, feuding with his father, but he mentions WCW before the match. He shouts out the roster members, mainly mid-carders like Lance Storm, O'Haire, Palumbo, Chavo, who were in a skybox for the event. And at that point, you're thinking, right, they're making these references. It's obviously the elephant in the room, but for the most part, it was how are they going to do this? How best to do it? And I don't think anyone actually knew the answer to that because they had a good product going on and they've just acquired this stuff, which was mostly for. I think they
yeah.
cared most about the tape library.
Yeah, and the well, absolutely, yeah. And I mean, looking at how the world is now, with the network, the tape library is absolutely crucial. But one thing I believe that Guy Evans actually pointed this out, and it is a massive kind of head slapping, obvious sign of either they didn't care or that they were just not thinking beyond 1 week. The match between Booker T and Buff Bagwell, which was booed out the building, was held in Tacoma, Washington, which was far from a WCW hotspot, where a lot of people weren't familiar with these guys. The following week's Raw, if they'd have held it off 1 week, it was held in Atlanta, Georgia, the home of WCW. Had they waited 1 week and put that Buff Bagwell challenging for the world title of Booker T by 1 week, things may very well have been different because that crowd in Atlanta would have lapped that up and maybe history would have been different.
That tells you everything you need to know, Dean. We've seen WWE do things masterfully, and if there's one thing you can't accuse them of lacking, it's the ability to promote and strategically make sure something. Think of the effort they put into someone like Roman Reigns if they want him to be the face of the company.
Yeah,
That was no oversight.
yeah,
They
definitely.
did not want it. They wanted it to be booed out the building. They wanted it to, or to maybe not even boo out build, but at the very least not get, because generally you're like getting
Not get a
massive,
positive response. Yeah,
yeah, massive heat is generally seen as superior to getting
yeah,
nothing. So they probably was hoping that it got absolutely nothing because I think it shows in their eyes it was there's nothing wrong with having guys like Booker T on board without actually having to convince him to jump ship.
yeah. Now, I
But
mean, contrary to popular belief, it's worth pointing out that the following week, on Raw, because that Bagwell Booker T match was July the 2nd, 2001. July the 9th in Atlanta in the Phillips Arena, Booker T did successfully defend the WCW World Title against Kurt Angle, and there was also a big multiple person match between Team ECW, Team WCW, and Team WWF.
That was the infamous episode. That was one of the. I mean, if you remember at the time, Dean, you remember this. The buzz about that episode, everyone loved it. It was incredible, and it's easy to forget that.
Yeah, you had ECW, Bubba Ray Dudley, Devon Dudley, Just Incredible, Lance Storm, Mike Awesome, Raven, Rhino, Rob Van Dam, Taz, and Tommy Dreamer. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's 10 aside. Yeah, then WCW was Chris Kanyon, Chuck Palumbo, Mark Jindrak, Sean O'Hare, and Sean Stasiak. Oh, and teaming up against WWF, which is Billy Gunn, Bradshaw Farouk, Hardcore Holly, and The Big Show. Yes, a 20-man tag match.
So the idea of that was, if you remember, right at the start of that episode was when they dropped the whole charade that WCW were just like a good promotion trying to run, because they still had Shane McMahon in charge, and he's still playing this babyface character. He's had the babyface feuds with Big Show, Kurt Angle, the famous King of the Ring Kurt Angle match, and they dropped the charade where they actually had Shane McMahon turn on the Undertaker while he was trying to get his hands on DDP. And they've had this for right now. They're a united front. Now they're really trying to attack the WWE. And as they're having a feud match later, I think it was like a tag match with Kane and Jericho and a couple of WCW wrestlers. I think it was like Lance Storm. It was a couple of WCW wrestlers who had ECW links, wasn't it? Was it Awesome and Storm against Kane and Jericho?
It was, Kane and Jericho against Lance Storm and Mike Awesome.
And that was when Tommy Dreamer and Rob Van Dam showed up, which no one expected. And that's when you had the who came out to make the save. You had Taz, Rhino, and everyone's thinking, right, they're for the save, and they suddenly turn around, don't they? And that was that Paul Heyman, feel this moment for the rest of your lifeline on commentary. So the whole episode was epic, because that main event was, WCW and WWE at war, but then suddenly they've been attacked by ECW. Let's nip this in the bud. 5 WCW, 5 WWE against 10 ECW. But that was a swerve as well. A lot of swerves on that episode, but
swerves.
But it did leave a mark. It had everyone buzzing. It was must-see TV.
Yeah. So we've seen that you can get, and they could make really good TV with this talent that they had at their disposal. So the question we put to our Twitter followers was, we said, could WCW have continued running under WWE or WWF ownership as was the original plan? So various answers to this. The first thing that came up was people comparing it to the ECW reboot. So we had Navdeep Rahill saying, I doubt it, Vince McMahon only knows how to book one form of pro wrestling. The disastrous reboot of ECW is a prime example of this. Whereas Jason Verin was a bit more direct by saying, depends how you feel about a zombie showing up in the first match. So they've both got valid points there in that I suppose the ECW reboot really didn't have the feel of ECW, which was a unique anti-establishment atmosphere. The atmosphere of WCW wasn't massively dissimilar to WWF when you compare it to ECW to WWF, but there was still a certain feel and a certain vibe to WCW. I guess things like the lighting, the presentation, the style of matches were always different, weren't they?
Yeah, but therein lies the problem for me, Dean, because as you said, what is WCW's identity? How do you create a WCW feeling show outside of a couple of superficial things you could do, like having the announce booth where Eric Bischoff and Bobby Heenan often were on Nitro? There's a couple of little touches you could do, but other than that, it's a rival company, and as a result, the only value it really had as soon as it become property of WWE for me is to run the rivalry, because that's what that was. It was the Monday Night Wars. And
Yeah,
even the two of us and anyone else listening who loved WCW and has so many memories of the little things, we can all agree and appreciate that trying to recreate that is not easy, because it's not like ECW. It's not like certain other promotions that had that genuine feel. They had their little touches they made their own, but you can't really just recreate it somewhere else.
because this was the original plan, wasn't it? That Vince allegedly was going to run presumably a Monday Nitro. I mean, it was often said that Nitro would take the Monday TV slot. That was the original plan. Obviously, it never came to pass, but that's what kind of inspired this question.
It's hard to see that actually happening, and even if they had tried it, it would have never have worked, because Raw
Yeah.
is mega established, and most diehard wrestling fans know Nitro. But when you're watching a TV show that has portrayed them as goofs and failures, and to be fair, they have proceeded to spend 2 to 3 years prior to being bought proving WWE right and basically blowing themselves up. I remember that monologue you gave right at the very beginning, Dean, of our first episode, where we covered Starcade '97, and then we briefly touched upon the downhill slope they went on.
Mm.
How WWE bought WCW for less money than Starcade '97 yielded for the company.
Yes, indeed.
So it's not like WWE had to do much of a smear campaign. As a result, it just seems surreal that they'd actually entertain the thought of replacing Raw with Nitro. Whereas, had they gone the other way round and given them SmackDown, people consider SmackDown part of the furniture now. But at the time, it was it was less than 2 years old. It had a rock-based pun of the name, and obviously he was going to go part time very, very soon, if he hadn't already, in fact. He pretty much did after WrestleMania 17. In fact, basically dovetailed with the WCW rival. You've got The Rock
Mm.
not being a full timer anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, you might as well just you know put SmackDown in the annals of primetime challenge, other well-known popular WWE concepts that only went a few years, and make it Thursday Nitro.
So that's an very interesting point there, because a similar thing was echoed by one of the people who responded to this, Kid Kahid, who said the brand was poisoned. The best they could do was give a WWE branded show to the WCW talent, like SmackDown became all WCW guys, no WWE guys. But that would have also required WWE buying some of those Warner-backed contracts like the NWO and Sting. Obviously, the NWO came in a year later, Sting much, much later. Whereas on the flip side of that, something else, someone by the name of Bootsy, presumably not his real name, says not a chance. Vince and Co had spent the entire company's lifetime belittling the product and telling the WWE audience that it was inferior. No amount of backpedaling would have persuaded most of the fans to try out the Enemy, which I think is what you're mentioning there, and maybe that's why Vince set that Booker T Bagwell matchup, set it up to fail.
Yeah, I just can't see any other scenario other than they really didn't want to go that route. They had assets they wanted to use. It was a storyline that served them for the period after the Attitude Era, and the hot streak associated with it essentially started to fizzle out. Because you'll remember some of those. Well, they ran what, 2 or 3 pay-per-views in between WrestleMania X7, which was like the pinnacle of that, and the end of the Attitude Era, and Invasion, which was the first full-blown, yes, this is war, the storyline takes center stage aspect. You've got Backlash, you've got Judgment Day, you've got King of the Ring, and I've actually got fond memories of watching all those. None of them are bad pay-per-views, but especially the main event scene, when you've got so much. Everyone crows about the 2-man power trip. I saw Steve Austin was saying, "Oh yeah, I wish it didn't end so quickly." But yeah, it was quite a dreary main event scene with just those two guys fighting Kane and the Undertaker, while you've got the Jerichos, the Angles bubbling underneath. So they were in a bit of a purgatory situation, and the WCW Invasion storyline gave them something fresh.
But you have to then ask, and this leads on to another point that was made by some of our Twitter followers, that did they, if they hadn't have run with a WCW company or promotion or pseudo promotion, and they have just, which is what happened, that they've just kind of swallowed up a few of the WCW talent. Would they have known what to do with them? I mean, we know that some of the undercard guys who weren't the most expensive were brought in. Some did better than others, but Dudley Eastbank comments. He said it would have quickly lost all its WCW-ness had the promotion gone on, because he does say WWF never quite got WCW and how it was different, and you can see that in how many WCW stars never really fit in well in WWF, and he gives plenty of names, people like Luger, Vader, the Steiners, Sting, Goldberg, Wyndham, and it's a very valid point. I mean, I think that they never quite captured the vibe, the essence of Goldberg. And then in reply to that, another one of our followers, Christopher DeSala, says, very true, they were booked very differently. Vader's reign-in was short-lived, and then he became a jobber. Vince didn't trust the process with Lex. Flash Funk probably would have been better as Too Cold Scorpio. The list goes on. They didn't fit well, and they weren't booked to go very far. So do you think they didn't fit the mold, or they weren't booked to fit the mold? They weren't booked to go far.
Oh, of course they weren't. I mean, if you remember the biggest examples, like acts like Mike Awesome and O'Hare and Palumbo, and how badly they were treated. And it wasn't even like, right, go out there and go. They were pretty much jobbed out, for lack of a better phrase, very early on. And if you remember, Dean, some of the reports going on at the time, we were hearing all sorts of from people who had a very good batting average of being reliable in this backstage information, and they were reporting back things like veteran WWE wrestlers making complaints about the new arrivals because they don't work the WWE style. That became a bit of a meme before memes were a thing, weren't it? Mocking the WWE style, because that's what they were supposed to be doing. There was all sorts of talk about guys who weren't introducing themselves in catering, also became a bit of a running joke, and all these things are being used to try to mark them down, which, as you know, in any other situation in society, is just classic politics, coming up with any sort of ridiculous made up reason to really criticize someone. And that's what it was all about. It was, you've already got that built-in reluctance by Vince McMahon, as proven by his track record, to use anything that's not his. And then every day he's going into work and he's hearing about, oh, this wrestler, he can't work. And we know some of these, I know like the Natural Born Thrillers needed some more seasoning, but then we also saw them give a decent enough account of themselves. You think of how great the likes of O'Hare and Palumbo were as tag team champions in the last 3 months. No doubt they were going to be better after 5 years or so, but they were decent enough then. And the company needed a shot in the arm, but the company didn't want a shot in the arm. The company wanted to have the same old status quo. And when you look at the environment at that point, where they've no longer got any competition whatsoever, of course that's what they're going to want. They're going to go back to that status quo and make as much money as possible doing as little as possible.
But we know from looking over wrestling history that the WWF's best product has come about when Vince's back is against the wall, when he has got competition. I mean, even now, look at how the NXT product improved once it started going head to head with AEW.
Yeah, he absolutely needs a gun put to his head. Otherwise, he's going to revert to type, and he's going to take as many shortcuts for his own benefit as possible. That's typical business, really, unfortunately. The competition had just gone out the window. They owned it, and as you know what, I really appreciate some of the amazing engagement we've had from fans on this. As you said, it's been a great time to be on the Because WCW Twitter, but I feel quite bad that we've had so much interaction on this one, and all signs, as evidenced by what people have been saying, all signs point to the same answer on this debate, which is it was never going to work. The only chance people had was you had guys like Booker T who had as maximum credibility as possible coming into it. Not many people had as high a stock as Booker T, as far as names that actually were optioned and picked up. And he went in there and he realised that his value was going to come from what he could make of himself beyond the WCW angle, because heaven knows, even he had to be knocked down a lot before he was built back up.
Yeah.
His peak in the company, which was the King Booker angle, and a serious world title reign, which was his only one that wasn't related to WCW, came 5 years after the Invasion angle.
Wow. Didn't
And
realise it was that long.
he spent the rest of his time. Well, he had that infamous WrestleMania match with Triple H, which basically just angered the entire diehard community. He had US title reigns, IC title reigns. He was a good hand throughout a bit. He was never going to get anywhere further. And the closest he got was the absolutely brilliant King Booker gimmick with Regal and Finlay backing him up. 2 other WCW alumni.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's worth noting as well that this sort of treatment goes back even further than that, because you think about how WWF booked Dusty Rhodes in the early 90s. A guy synonymous with the NWA, with WCW, and he's brought in wearing polka dots with a large black woman as his valet, which I'm sure Vince McMahon was laughing at, finding hilarious, and just generally mid-card, as you say, nowhere near a title, nowhere near the main event picture. You could say the same thing as Ronnie Garvin, as a former NWA World Champion. You could even say the same as Terry Taylor for where he came into the NWA after the UWF was brought out. And a similar thing happened there, where
that was the shining example, wasn't it?
Yeah, UWF was this regional company that they bought, and they kind of quickly just merged the titles with NWA titles. And the company disappeared. And Terry Taylor, who was the UWF champion, he was told that he'd be in the main event, and because he was at the time he was one of the most promising stars of young stars of his era. He just disappeared into the mid card, then went to the WWF and was made into the Red Rooster, and never really recovered from there. I mean, we've seen him go back to WCW as the tailor-made man, a kind of a poor man's Ted DiBiase, but that killed his career off. I think the only person, and I think we talked about this with Guy Evans again, the only person who really kept his stock, kept his momentum from one company to the next, was Ric Flair.
Yeah, I mean, you just can't bring down Ric Flair. We've seen so many people try, Jim Herd, Eric Bischoff, the list goes on. He's just irrepressible. So that's more of a testament to the point than anything else, that he's always going to be the exception. But to think all the comparisons to the watered down WWE ECW are fair, but if you remember at the time, Dean, when we were watching all this unfold in 2001, even much younger, I was just a teenager at the time, but you're still thinking, right, just give me a good show, give me that July 9th episode of Raw every week, give me excitement, give me something new. And we're watching it unfold, and we're seeing everything get botched, and the whole WCW thing just being swept into a corner and assets stripped. The comparison at the time was absolutely the UWF and Crockett, because that was the shining example back then.
I think the only one of these, the only sort of invasion angle, buying out, whatever you want to call it, angle that I can think partially worked was New Japan and the UWFI
Yep.
back in the mid '90s, and I've just looked it up to refresh my memory, but Wrestling World 1996, which was the Tokyo Dome January the 4th show, so the precursor to Wrestle Kingdom, and they had among the rest of the card, they had 3 New Japan v UWFI bouts. The first one was just a 6-man tag, which New Japan won. The second one was a singles match. Riki Choshu beat Masahito Kakihara, so that made it 2-0, and effectively ended the best of 3 series. But then the biggest shock of all was that in the main event, Keiji Muto lost the IWGP Heavyweight title to Nobuhiko Takada. Which I remember at the time was unheard of, because this was the invading company's top star coming in and beating New Japan's champion. Now I'm trying to think off the top of my head who the WWF champion was in 2001 at this point in time. Was it Austin or
What month was this? Was this Jan 4?
this January this was the Tokyo Dome January the 4th year. But I'm just thinking around
Kurt Angle went into the year as the champion.
but
He lost
yeah,
it to Rock February.
and then I'm just trying to think who would have been the champion at the time of the invasion angle.
Booker T.
Whether that the WWF champ.
Oh, the WWF champ was Austin, wasn't it?
It was Austin, right? So
Yeah.
this would be the equivalent of Austin against Booker T as a singles match
In Booker T's
in
debut.
Invasion. In Booker T's debut,
Yeah.
or not, even if you didn't have it as Booker T's debut, but you just had a title unification match, and Booker T wins the WWF title on a WWF pay-per-view. And I think just to have the balls to book that is amazing, and it all boils down to the fact that the company that's WWF won the war, but they didn't want to give WCW any credit for being a viable and a credible rival, I guess.
Yeah, that's one thing. If I had the ability to time travel, I would go back to all of these booking meetings featuring a booking team trying to devise the best plan for their company who have just bought out another company and they're doing an invasion. I love to go to all these meetings while they're deciding how best to crush the newly acquired assets. And I'd just love to occasionally walk up to them and start smacking them across the head while saying, "You own all of these fucking people." with a slap punctuating each word, and we see if that gets through to them.
Yeah, because to push the invaders as the heels that are actually dominating your company, guess what? That's going to get your fans behind your company.
Look at the New World Order.
Yeah,
We've covered that plenty of times on here, and we've marvelled at how good an angle that's been. And
the New World Order was inspired by that Wrestling World 1996 show, because Eric Bischoff was in attendance at the Tokyo Dome and thought, hey, this is good.
With a little bit of WWF, WCW overtones 5 years before we'd get the sort of real thing. I did also want to give a shout, if we're going to say about few places that have managed to do it successfully, one of the better invasion angles I've seen, it was on a smaller scale, but big enough for die-hard fans to respect, considering the amount of things that need to be balanced in it, is, do you remember the 2006-ish independent feud between Combat Zone Wrestling and Ring of Honor, Dean?
I remember seeing it. I wasn't following it intently, but I do remember reading about it. Yeah.
Now, that was really well done, where they delicately handled it so that there were a fair amount of wins on each side. There were wrestlers on each roster acting as heels to the other side, generating heat on home turf. You had a final blow-off match that gave both sides an excuse as to say like we were robbed or because Ring of Honor won the final match, but
Yeah.
Combat Zone Wrestling had an excuse, and Ring of Honor had a reason why they were hard done by, and their out was okay, etc., etc. And best of all, I believe 3 of the major shows as part of this feud, they set up the convention hall, the recreational centre, those sort of independent venue you get that holds like 500 to 1,000 people.
Yeah.
They set them up with opposing bleachers, sort of like a football match where you'd have
Right.
the away fans in one stand and the home fans in the other, and so they'd be doing chants at each other, and no one has ever done that. And when you consider the fact that these were 2 completely standalone companies who went into agreement with each other. Maybe that's the only way to get it done.
Yeah, I mean there was a similar-ish thing with in British wrestling. It was a show I was involved in, which was a feud between IPW UK, which was like a fast-growing and popular and fashionable independent at the time down in the southeast of England, and the FWA, who were like the established independent promotion in the southeast of England. And it culminated in a show held at IPW's home venue in Orpington, and it was a series of matches culminating in the champion versus champion, with the losing promotion to fold, and an IPW won it and the FWA folded. But that was because the FWA was ceasing operations in any case, and it was kind of agreed to do this as a as a good angle where you already knew, those behind the scenes already knew what the outcome was. But yeah, that was a similar thing in that one half of the hall they had all the IPW fans sitting, and another half of the hall all the FWA fans were sitting. So again, you had, as you said, you had that rivalry between different halves of the crowd.
Yeah, it's just such a great atmosphere, and whether it's for an
Yeah.
invasion angle or something else, you just wish you see a little bit more of it because it's a great idea.
Listen up, slapnuts. That's right. This is Jeff Jarrett, the chosen one, and you're listening to Because WCW. Now choke on that.
Okay, so yeah, we have largely established, I think, the massive landslide majority on that question on Twitter was, as you've said there, Liam, that there is just no way realistically that Vince McMahon would have allowed WCW to continue running, even if it was under his control,
Yep.
just because of egos. But we received a tweet from a chap called Jake Pugh, who said, "How would you have booked WCW's first pay-per-view under WWE's ownership? Take contracts and money out of the equation. Everyone's available. What would you have done?" So this then got you thinking about your fantasy book in your Fusient fan fiction. What if Fusient had bought WCW, which is available on our website, because www.podbean.com. How far are you up to on it now?
Yeah, so via the Google Docs that I initially write it up on, I have just written WCW Lockdown 2007. You'll see a few parallels there between a certain company that was, unlike WCW, alive in in the mid 2000s. But yeah, spring of 2007, I've got Slamboree 2007 featuring the Crockett Cup coming up next. And that is how far I've gone. If you read the episodic version on hookedonwrestling.co.uk, head to the features page, look for WCW 2.0. I basically take these episodes I've written up over the years on Google Docs, and I'm just fine tuning them, making them look a bit better with formatting, and pasting them as week by week episodes. That is currently caught up to early 2003. Adds a few extra graphics. It just looks a bit better with formatting. I fix a few errors. It looks nicer like that. But if you want to binge the whole thing, yeah, 2001 to 2007 and still going.
Very nice. So this prompted you to post on our Twitter page the question of the fact that the Big Bang pay-per-view was set for May the 6th, 2001. We even had a picture of the poster up there, had they continued. So we asked our Twitter followers, we want you to book the matches for that pay-per-view. What would you go for? We also tapped up our old mate David Penzer for very good reason, because when you interviewed him, he was going to be one of the creative inputters, wasn't he?
Yeah, Johnny Ace's assistant, and Johnny Ace obviously would have been head of the booking committee.
Johnny
So
Ace, better known some fans obviously as John Laurinaitis, who's
people power.
yeah. So David Penzer said, my belief was to build Scott Steiner as a monster and bring Goldberg back to beat him. Not saying that was the plan, but that's what I understood. Which you've got the two established main eventers there, and I think a match that the crowd would certainly have popped for.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the best things about late WCW, wasn't it? They had a couple of absolute belters, especially that Full Brawl 2000 match.
Mm.
They were one of the few good things about the top of WCW. But yeah, do you know what? When Dave said that, it did strike me. If you think about that late WCW, the way they did run in January, February, March with the Magnificent Seven faction, that Scott Steiner was like the crown jewel, WCW world champion. It feels like that's exactly where they were going. So that makes sense that Dave would say that, but I have to suspect, because you've got to think of how exactly WCW lands. Say they do survive and Fusient buys them. Do they necessarily just keep on trucking after spring breakout? I believe it's been confirmed by a few places that probably not. They wouldn't have been running nitros even if they were bought out. They would have needed that break, and it would have been a proper reset with the
Yeah.
May 6th pay-per-view. So because of that, and because then you start to think, right, who would actually be kept on? Obviously, there was some ridiculous disciplinary issues in late. You remember with Kevin Nash just shamelessly
Yes.
trying to get Scott Hall hired, which really rubbed up Warner the wrong way. Scott Steiner was still getting in fights with the likes of DDP. So it makes you wonder, if they do hit this reset, they're probably looking at, right, we do have to trim some of the fat as far as problematic wrestlers.
Yeah.
So I don't think it would have been as simple as just carrying on the storyline that they were doing seamlessly. It wouldn't have
Yeah.
been that easy.
I mean, yeah, I'll go through some of the cards that some of our
There were some good ideas, if I
followers
remember.
have come up with, and it's not only is it interesting to see what people have, who people have got, but it's also interesting to see who people have not got, who's been omitted from this. So Cezanne Isai, who listens to us all the way from Melbourne, Australia, so pretty much the opposite end of the world to us. He says Steiner beating Booker T for the world title, DDP beating Mike Awesome, Ric Flair defeating Jeff Jarrett, Shane Douglas beating Dustin Rhodes for the vacant US belt, O'Haire and Palumbo beating Stasiak and Jindrak for the tag titles. Lance Storm beats Canyon. Helms beats Jason Jett for the Cruiserweight title. And the Young Dragons are defeated by Kidman and Ray for the Cruiserweight tag titles, which, of course, they brought in right at the very end there.
Yeah, I think some of the timelines of the titles are a little bit off there. For instance, Jason Jett wasn't the cruiserweight champion, but maybe this is done based on the assumption that it would be
No,
a weekly show.
Jet. Yeah, I think Jet is challenging there, and Helms. I'm guessing Helms is the champion at that point.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was going to say there's a few, because I know obviously Jindrak wasn't a tag team champion. The Thrillers were essentially done at this point, and because the tag team of O'Haire and Palumbo kind of rose from their ashes.
Yeah.
And there was a pay-per-view. We covered Super Bowl Revenge already on this podcast, and fellow former Thrillers, Stasiak and Jindrak, kind of did the whole jilted, jealous, we're better than you guys, we should have the belts, challenged unsuccessfully. Other than that, they're pretty much done. Stasiak had his new gimmick. Jindrak was kind of just floating without direction. I don't think he appeared. Did he appear on WCW after Super Bowl? That might have been his last. I'm not sure. So yeah, a bit of it was a bit of a loose end, but it's easy to forget where some of that is, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay, and so then we've also got Unco Dion, who again he has Steiner against Booker main event for the world title. One that's a really interesting matchup. I've just looked it up, and it only happened on one Nitro once, but Sting v Lance Storm. I thought we'll come back to that in a minute. Then a four-way number one contenders match: DDP, Goldberg, Jarrett, and Flair. I like this. Rey Mysterio and Helms in a ladder match for the cruiserweight title. Canyon and Bigelow v Palumbo and O'Haire for the tag belts. Kidman and Skipper for the US title. Stasiak v Awesome, Squash for Awesome, and Luger and Buff in a pose down. So another Steiner Booker main event. Sting v Lance Storm. That's just got big time kind of Sting and Malenko Nitro match vibes to me as something that could be a real underrated match of the night.
Absolutely. That is one of them things that stands out to you, that if WCW survives under Fusient in their back pocket as a pay-per-view match, absolutely they run with that. Likely not as the main event, but then Sting was, as you said, Sting was always adept at being able to have good featured matches, maybe just one or two matches shy of the main event
Look
against
at
pretty much anyone.
the match with Regal that we covered just a
Just
little while
covered that.
ago.
That's a perfect example. So yeah, he could do this aimlessly, uh, but I think I won't get into exactly how I view a potential thing, but I will say that I believe I ran Sting versus Storm on the November 2001 pay-per-view on my own fan fiction. So even with myself, I know that that's absolutely
Yeah,
something you want to deploy.
yeah. And I mean Rey Mysterio v Helms ladder match, you couldn't go wrong with something like that. I mean, Rey Mysterio doesn't do an awful lot of ladder matches from what I can remember, but I think something against Helms, who is very adept at that, would have been great.
Yeah, I'm into the idea of Helms in a ladder match very early in the few. I go a slightly different direction, but again, I'll detail it after. But yeah, you've basically one of the big things that happened just before the end of WCW was Helm's crowning moment. It happened at Greed, the final pay-per-view. He
Mm.
finally dethroned Chavo Guerrero Jr., at which point this is my mandatory moment, Dean, where I mention that Chavo Guerrero Jr. as Cruiserweight Champion towards the end of WCW was one of the low-key greatest little runs of a mid-card title ever. He was fantastic. He had great matches. He elevated so many of those Cruiserweights, such as Helms. In that, and you had a genuine cruiserweight division on your hands, considering that a year before it was Medusa versus Oklahoma for the cruiserweight title.
Yeah,
Chavo Guerrero was the linchpin of reviving it with all that young talent around him.
absolutely. And we reviewed Greed back all the way back in episode number 7. If you go to our website, because wcw.podbean.com, or just go to wherever you get your podcasts from and find episode number 7, which, if memory serves me right, was the first episode where we got our audio right and we didn't sound like we were locked in toilet cubicles next door to each other.
Potentially, or the one after, but I do remember that the first 7 episodes, 1-7, we basically deliberately selected pay-per-views to go from Starrcade 97 to Greed. We just
To
wanted
the
that.
end, yeah.
We just wanted that Cliff's Notes history of how they managed to somehow self-destruct in 3 years. So that's
Yeah.
exactly why we covered it so early.
Yeah, Francis Reyes says totally buffed v Natural Born Thrillers v Team Canada World Tag Title match, DDP v Rick Steiner, Disco Inferno v Shane Helms for the Cruiserweight belt, Scott Steiner v Booker T for as the main event for the World and US titles, Sean Stasiak v Sean O'Haire v Jeff Jarrett in a 3-way as well. So that's largely pushing the younger talent and going in the direction that as we've mentioned, WCW was going in towards the end of its run.
Absolutely. I am now starting to believe that whenever someone refers to the Thrillers in the tag title match, they are talking about O'Haire and Palumbo, because they were the last WCW tag team champions, and also they are exactly the sort of perfect example what you're saying there about great young talents coming through. The Natural Born Thriller stable was just this big collection of green wrestlers who were put on TV too early. but towards the end, you had the two most capable guys of it making a makeshift team, and you'll remember covering Super and Greed. They made them look like stars. They beat Nash and Page with a bit of help, but they beat Luger and Bagwell
Luger and Bagwell,
incredibly.
yeah.
They were hell bent on making him look like the team of 2001, and that's definitely one thing I emphasised was that they were dominant in the tag ranks. If those two carried on, you make them the tag team Goldberg.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, obviously they didn't have the same charisma as Goldberg, but who did? But yeah, you've
But they're
got that
going in
model to
smashing duos up.
yeah,
Big double teams. You've got a 6 foot guy who backflips off the ropes. They're hitting crisp super kicks, big power moves. You've got the Swanton bomb. O'Hare's clearly a future star looking at the whole dichotomy of it. But Palumbo ended up doing pretty well. He ended up coming back to WWE a lot more seasoned. Do you remember he had that little run? So
Yeah,
he was never a bad wrestler, Palumbo. He was always
no.
decent and very big and marketable.
Yeah. Then Jamal Lewis said he'd have booked an elimination fatal four-way for the WCW title: Booker T, DDP, Goldberg v Sting, Jeff Jarrett v Ric Flair to see if Flair still has it, Conan and Rey Mysterio for the US title, which you know is always going to be good because of the way those two know each other, and then an open challenge by Scott Steiner, which could link to a debut for someone. And the reason I mention this is because this links in beautifully with something that was brought up by a couple of people, but most notably Simon Strong, who says about based on storylines before it closed and possible ECW pickups, because of course, as we mentioned right at the beginning when talking about that classic episode of Raw, ECW had folded up in January of 2001, so there would be plenty of ECW talent available. I think half of them had gone to WCW at one point or another anyway. So Simon comes up with Booker TV Sting for the world title, Flair, Jarrett, Rick Steiner, Luger, and Buff v Goldberg, Page, Nash, Cat, and Rhodes. And that's the first. It's notable. That's the first mention anywhere of Kevin Nash. Canyon v Storm v Van Dam v Douglas for the vacant US title. He goes on Helms v Moore for the Cruiserweight title, Rey Mysterio, Kidman v the Young Dragons for the Cruiserweight tag, Hugh Morris v Sabu, which is an intriguing matchup. O'Hare and
Who'd
Palumbo.
blow the most spots?
O'Hare and Palumbo v Doring and Roadkill. Tag titles v the last ever ECW champs. Awesome v Douglas, Jason Jett v Chavo v Skipper v Romeo v Styles v Super Crazy v Noble v Kid Cash. So man, you'd have a lot of matches and a lot of people to get through. But again, just look at that talent pool.
It's easy to forget that Kid Cash had already showed up in WCW, so he wouldn't even be an acquisition. He was there. I think he was was he part of the Cruiserweight Tag Title Tournament? He definitely showed up a couple of times on Thunder, along with other new acts such as Air Raid.
Air Raid, yeah, Air Paris, and I was watching the AJ Styles documentary on the network the other day, and yeah, there was footage of Air Raid on WCW there, yeah.
Air Raid and Air Styles they were market, which makes sense because you bring them in as like a marketable tag team, but you just know that AJ would have been breaking through very very soon, and my fan fiction pulls that one as well.
Yeah, just reading here. Yeah, 2 months after ECW folded, Kid Cash signed with WCW where they billed him as Cash. His only match was on the final episode of Thunder, airing on March the 21st, where he lost to Jason Jett. And then that same week, WCW was purchased by the WWF.
Great opponent to give to Jason Jett because Kid Cash and Easy Money had some bangers in 2000 ECW. They were doing the top rope powerbomb into a Hurricane Rana spot. They were just tearing the house down. So yeah, it's a safe pair of hands to put in there with him. And you'd imagine that's part of the brand spanking new Cruiserweight division if WCW carries on.
If yeah. And then one final one from Tom Campbell, radio DJ, who followed us and dropped us a line. He says, I fancy booked this years ago. He's got the title match as Booker T v Sting, the new leader via Legend wanting one more run. Goldberg v Scott Steiner, no DQ, let them rip shreds off each other. Rob Van Dam v Jeff Jarrett, Jarrett playing gatekeeper to try and keep the ECW invader out. And then I love this. WCW promised to revolutionize tag team wrestling with a 16-team tournament inviting talent around the world. The winning team gets a shot at their division's tag title. In a twist, get a contracted WCW legend to oversee it, call it the Dusty Cup.
Tom, dude, love you, love Cultaholic, but they own the Crockett Cup rights. Just bring Crockett Cup back. I think he just wanted to make a bit of a joke because obviously
The
NXT
Dusty Classic,
later brought their own Dusty Classic back.
But what's interesting here is Booker TV Sting, the new pretty much a new, almost new blood v millionaires club in a way. It's that premise. But unlike the NWO era guys, I could see Sting cleanly putting Booker T over there to pave the way for a long reign for him.
Absolutely, it did come up more than once. That was definitely another match. Doesn't have the novelty of Sting Lance Storm, for instance, because they did go back and forth a lot. And you'll remember, Dean, as we're covering the watch-alongs, there's a lot of interaction between Sting and Booker T even then. But then you can play into that, so it's a very storied, very WCW rivalry, and yet it still has a degree of freshness because Booker T is less than 12 months into the main event scene at this juncture. So yeah, I've really enjoyed seeing some of these takes. It's nice seeing things like Sting and Booker T come. Given that I wrote this years ago and I've moved to 2007, should I roadmap the first couple of months maybe of mine?
Go on.
Okay, so obviously what interested me about how people approach this question, I like to answer. I like to pose open-ended questions for people to answer because there's enough interest in what their answer is, but also you get to see a bit of insight of how they interpret the question and how they approach answering it, which in itself is just as intriguing. Now, for the purpose of what we put on social media, we didn't actually say what the situation was between the spring breakout Nitro we saw and the Big Bang. But for all intents and purposes, for what I wrote, the situation was this. It did look like it was going to fall through. Eric Bischoff hinted on previous Nitros that we don't know what's happening, so we're doing the Night of Champions. It's going to be a season finale. But hypothetically, maybe the day before the announcement came, it was on the Friday, wasn't it? 3 days before, March 23rd, the WWE buys WWB. In this scenario, Fusient had managed to talk the Turner networks round somehow, and I'd also like to think in that alternate universe they managed to someone manages to convince WCW to keep Animaniacs, which was another victim recently brought back.
I loved Animaniacs.
It is
Absolutely
back.
Loved that.
Animaniacs, they've remade a brand new Animaniacs. I have to send you a link, and there's also a new version of DuckTales, which is awesome.
Oh.
So all the good stuff's coming back. We've got wrestling on TNT, we've got Animaniacs, we've got DuckTales. Life is how it should be. So at the 11th hour, they've cut a deal, and that means they can use the talents. The deal is that the weekly TV show will now be on a Saturday because there's no point fighting the Monday Night Wars. The Monday Night Wars are dead. The competition's over. WWE are number one, but WCW stands to be able to make money by not fighting a war because, as we've seen with TNA and AEW, there is room in the market for two major promotions. So they're operating on that basis, and they are going to do Saturday Nitro. See what I did there?
Oh.
WCW Saturday Night.
Nitro,
yeah, and it starts at 6:05.
Oh, lovely.
As it should. So there's a bit of various eras in that. Perfect time for it. But the thing is the spring breakout Nitro actually happens pretty much how the real one did, with the exception of there's no McMahon's all over it because they didn't buy it. But the matches are the same. So you have Ray and Kidman win the Cruiser Tag titles from Skipper and Romeo. You have, I think, was it O'Haire and Palumbo defend against Team Canada. Booker T wins the unification match against Scott Steiner, and he does have both the belts. And the show ends with Sting, Ric Flair having their match. They have an emotional hug. Other members of the roster come out too, and they have like a farewell. No one knows what the fate is. Then, as I said, likelihood. No TV shows. You've got a month of nothing other than some guerrilla marketing, some hype on the website, this, that, and the other. And the premise that there is indeed a pay per view May 6th, the Big Bang. And just because you're kind of trying to get people to buy it based on a mystery, which doesn't always sell with pay-per-views historically, but you also throw in a little sweetener. People who buy the Big Bang will also get Slamboree later in the month, 2 pay-per-views that month. But if you buy Big Bang before the Big Bang airs, you get both for the price of one.
Buy
Now,
one, get one free.
And the Big Bang pretty much has more of a special episode of TV feel than a formal pay-per-view, because I'm not going to waste big matches on this relaunch. It's going to be like a special edition of Nitro with a premise that there'll be big names, and the 2 for 1, hopefully people will still buy it, and even if they don't, you're building up to it. Now, on the Big Bang, you have Bischoff introduce it, cuts a promo, says we're back, now I'm the owner, we're going to keep living, we're going to do things. He formally announces, in your typical opening talk a bit, he formally announces that Booker T will have to relinquish the US title because he can't be both. Booker T's in the ring as part of it, he comes out, he's in the ring, and that gives the opportunity for the Magnificent Seven to come out for the confrontation, threats to beat him up, etc., etc. Bischoff's like, no, Flair's not the owner anymore, he can't run these sort of plays, not on my watch. He says the main event this pay-per-view is going to be 7 versus 7. Magnificent Seven as a faction against 7 of the faces of their past, the sort of guys they've been messing with.
Yeah. Now, if people can't remember, because it was obviously 20 years ago, who the Magnificent Seven faction, who was in that?
Yeah, that was a storyline they ran quite late on. While they were getting coherent, they had a collection of heels come together with Ric Flair, who's playing a babyface CEO, doing the big ruse at Sin. I think we covered that as well. Maybe not.
Yep,
I don't know.
I think we have, yeah.
I think we have as well. We'll have to double check. But he does the ruse that he was behind this all. He's back to being an evil boss. And part of his collection of heels, you had the WCW champion Scott Steiner. You had Rick Steiner, who they swindled the US championship onto him. You had Lex Luger, Buff Bagwell, who often teamed up as Totally Buff and ran Goldberg out or cheated Goldberg out at WCW. Jeff Jarrett's in there. And you've got Road Warrior animals like the Heavy, the Enforcer. So you've got this group, because that group's still there from before. We're making this big main event. They're going to go up against some of the guys they've been opposing in this feud, almost like a blow-off to that particular chapter. Obviously, you've got Booker T. You've got Dustin Rhodes, who's run afoul of them, and he had the storyline with Flair and Jarrett, didn't he, where they kissed the his ass. Do you remember that?
5 concussions, mate. Sorry.
Well, they had that comedy match at Greed. Do you remember? It was Dustin and Dusty against Flair and Jarrett.
Flair, yes.
Kiss my ass match, and they brought out Donkey on Nitro.
With Flair in like a Hawaiian shirt or a tropical shirt or something, wasn't he? Yes.
So as a result of that, you can put both the Rhodeses into the match because it's a 14-man tag. Dusty ain't got to do much. You got Booker T, you got Sting, you got Nash, you got Goldberg. So you got a big collection there, and you got like that big superstar tag main event. This is also where you have the announcement of Saturday Nitro. You find out that's going to be happening. I think all the cruiserweights. So you got the cruiser champ, Chavo Guerrero, his challenger. You got Skipper and Romeo. You got Ray and Kidman, who've just taken titles from him. You have a 6-man tag. All the champions in one match. Heels get the win. Build to Saint a little later on. And you've got the start of the US title tournament. I won't run through all the exact matches. Read it up if you want. But the one thing you need to know about that tournament is that included in it is a mystery member of the bracket, and it turns out to be the debuting Rob Van Dam. Because obviously, if you're going to have all these ECW wrestlers up for option, he's arguably the one who deserves the big star treatment.
Yeah.
Everyone else will kind of just make a more low-key introduction. You let their in-ring work win over following, but Rob Van Dam can just show up and be a big unveiling. In the main event, obviously the babyfaces win, and it also involves Goldberg taking out Animal because he's now vowing he's back for revenge. He's going to end the Magnificent Seven. Turns out in the road to Slamboree, it's easier said than done, because at that pay-per-view you get your rematch where Scott Steiner challenges Booker T for the title one-on-one because he is due a rematch. So that's your main event. Goldberg wipes out Buff Bagwell and Lex Luger in a handicap match. Proper squash. Truly has his way with them. And that really sets him back as being back, and he gets his revenge on the guys that run him out. You'll remember at the end of Greed, Rick Steiner helps Scott retain against DDP. So that's a nice quick singles grudge match. You've got DDP versus Rick Steiner on the show. And the most interesting one of all these tail-offs as the Magnificent Seven starts to disintegrate is you've got Jeff Jarrett, who is not happy that Ric Flair showed emotion at the final Nitro and hugged Sting, and he's been kind of in play ever since, where they've been trying to say to him, look, the Magnificent Seven, it's not you. Come and embrace the fact that you bleed WCW. We all love you. Come back. So he finds himself in the middle of Sting and Jarrett in that debate. So he referees a singles match between the two, and he keeps it right down the middle. But obviously, to a heel, that's not good enough. So Jarrett is not happy that he's lost clean to Sting, and Ric Flair has not been a biased referee. So he slaps Flair, and he gets a right hand to his trouble. And there's your babyface turn. That leads to the Great American Bash, where Ric Flair can face Jeff Jarrett one-on-one. And you can do the whole thing about, as you said, he's wrestling a Hawaiian shirt, wrestling a Nitro t-shirt. By this point, he can be motivated and ready to come out in his trunks and actually show a bit of the old Flair. And I love how one of the guys said they'd do a match where, I can't remember who it was.
Oh, has Flair still got it with against Jarrett? Let me just see who that was again.
And this is my way of leading
that was,
into it.
Jamal Lewis. Jeff Jarrett v. Ric Flair. Does Flair still have it? Yeah.
And this is how I lead into it. It's a logical storyline. He showed that love of WCW when it looked like the company was over. His career flashed before his eyes, and he realised he was WCW more than he was a corrupt heel owner. And it causes the dissension there. And Jarrett's move after that is to actually start his own faction, an anti-horseman. And I called this, given that he's the chosen one, I called his faction the Chosen Few.
Uh-huh.
And that's Flair and Sting and their friends in a feud with Jeff Jarrett, the debuting C.W. Anderson, who another ECW pick off, and he's got the arm tie-in with Flair. Yeah. And I think they also pick up Mike Sanders, Shane Douglas, who hates Flair, makes sense, and Mark Jindrak, who needs a direction. He's a stud. So they've got like this ragtag group to try and destroy Ric Flair. That leads to September, because what happens in WCW in September, Dean?
Full Brawl.
And
War Games.
War Games, there we go. Meanwhile, the main event of the Great American Bash, I won't go much further than this, because the Magnificent Seven has been finished and disbanded, and because Goldberg has come back on a hot tear, he makes a logical sense to be the next number one contender. So you've got a battle of the two aces, Booker T and Goldberg. And I think they only had like a singles match on Nitro where Russo's booking wasted them. So you do a big pay-per-view match. Goldberg actually wins the title, so he finally gets that title win he never got since the 98 streak. But the thing is Booker T's not happy with that, because he thought he was going to be the face of the company from here on out. So in the rematch at Bash of the Beach, he turns heel to win the title back, and then he's got a whole lot of chatter, because we saw heel Booker T in WWE at this point, and he was pretty good at it, so it makes sense that he would go on this run. The US title tournament ends at Slamboree. The finals is Rob Van Dam. He's just debuted. Makes sense he goes all the way. He faces Kanyon in the finals. Kanyon cheats to beat him. You remember Kanyon actually had a cup of coffee with the US title in WWE TV when it was handed to him. And he's a deserving US champ. So that's and obviously you do the chase, and Rob Van Dam ultimately wins the belt off of him a couple of pay-per-views later. And one of my favourites is after Scott Steiner's finished with his rematch and he fails to get the title back from Booker T, he takes a different approach to trying to get gold back around his waist. He goes back with his brother and he changes O'Haire and Palumbo. Because what better way to mint the new tag champions than to have them beat one of the greatest teams in WCW history?
Yeah.
So if you want to see more, I could go on and I could do an episode just based on this. But but if you're into that sort of thing, and I really have enjoyed, I've had guys like messaging me and engaging about, and where can I get the link for all this? What would you have done? I've been shooting the breeze of all week. It's been amazing. It really, on a sad time, thinking back about the end of WCW for us WCW diehards, it's been really good to engage with some of you about our hypotheticals and our fancy booking. And for those of you who want to read up a bit more of this yourselves, let us know. We can sort out the exact address. But basically, if you go these website bit.ly, so bit.ly / capitals WCW 2001, that will get you started, and there'll be links to all the other years from there. It's also on Hooked on Wrestling. We're 2 years into it.
Every so often a new one of those drops in. Yeah,
we're doing it episodically style, still going there.
Yep, hookedonwrestling.co.uk, which is also a great site for all your wrestling news as well.
Oh man, yes it is.
But I mean, yeah, obviously a lot of this also is based on the fact that people, when asked, if the Steiners are asked to put Palumbo and O'Haire over, that the answer wouldn't be nope. Although that was more Randy Savage, obviously. But that's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother day, which we have touched on previously, the infamous backstage politics. But my goodness, I think it's safe to say that we've all concluded that WWE owning WCW would never have worked. But had Fusient taken it over, as was the original plan, had WCW continued, then my goodness me, there would have been some classic matches ready for us.
The potential for, you just have to hope that they don't do what previous WCW did and screw it up. Because they did have previous.
Yeah. Because as we said, the last couple of months, basically WCW in 2001 was actually pretty bloody good. But I think, unfortunately, there was hardly anyone watching by that point because of what had happened in the previous year or so. But,
it was a death rattle, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Going out strong because they knew they were donezo.
But hey, so 20 years since WCW shut up shop, and like you said, Liam, diehards, WCW diehards like you and me, we miss it all we miss it. We miss it every day. The wrestling world has not been the same since, but such is life, sadly.
But that's what gives me hope, though, to be honest. So although it's sad and bleak thinking about how WWE were never going to do WCW justice, it really has cheered me up thinking that we've been doing this for 3.5 years now, Dean, and we've had such a good time looking back at the ridiculous and the sublime, and the amount of engagement we've had on social media. And you like to think we're only going to continue to keep finding more like-minded fellow WCW lovers. And even we've even encountered people who weren't really around at that time, but have found it on the network and like, wow, I like some of this. So it's been great to still be able to use its legacy to reconnect with fellow fans.
Absolutely, that's the beauty of it. That some people might be a bit disillusioned with wrestling right now, or like myself, you're finding it really, really difficult to watch wrestling without a live audience because the audience is such an integral part of the wrestling business. So you can just trawl the archives and really start getting into some old historic wrestling. But we could talk about this for ages, but we will draw a line at that point. And I think we'll wrap up episode number 89, which we're getting to that point. Like a cricketer on 89 runs, you start thinking about the century, Liam. We're not that far away.
Yeah, and that's when we LBW, isn't it?
Say again, sorry.
That is when we LBW. If you want to make
we LBW,
yes. You're going to make a cricket reference, at least be able to keep up with the rest of them.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said with your exotic East London accent.
Are you trying to say my Cockney accent's too intelligent to hear, are you? Huh?
And given that a good 50% of our listeners are in the United States, cricket is basically posh baseball, but it can last for 5 days. I
But
think that's
it's
the
not as good
easiest
as
thing.
baseball. I know I sound like a traitor, but I prefer baseball.
I've never really watched it. Maybe I should. Maybe when the world opens up, maybe we can go to a game if they ever do one over here or something.
You call it Silly Boys Rounders, don't you?
Hey, I have played softball before, a la Sid, but I haven't played baseball.
I like that
Right.
reference.
So, well, yeah, we got to just bookmark it and wrap it up at the end with a WCW reference there. So, listen, folks, thank you so much for downloading this episode wherever you get your podcast from. As Liam said, we really, really do appreciate it. We appreciate the interaction with people on the socials. We are on Twitter at BecauseWCW. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/BecauseWCW. Do drop us a line, do give us a follow, and we'll be back very, very shortly with, well, we've got another, I think the next thing on the agenda is the post Great American Bash 96 Nitro watch along, isn't it?
I think that'll be a good one to do next.
Very much so. And then we'll be back on the pay-per-view trail with some guests very shortly. So on behalf of Liam, this is me, the Twisted Genius, saying thank you for downloading us. Please keep supporting us. Please do rate and review us. Until next time, we'll see you ringside.